Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. I have to confess today that I have not done this week's assigned War and Peace reading. Last week, I only completed about half of it. I've also been awful about filming videos, terrible about responding to your wonderful comments in anything like a timely manner, and pathetic when it comes to watching any of the Booktube videos I really want to be watching. I really will try to catch up on the War and Peace videos in a few days, but today I want to do something else. Today's conversation is no way of an apology for my absence, but I do want to chat just a bit about what has been going on lately in my life. Almost all good news, although some of it has a shadow. Let me say first that today is my son's 23rd birthday. Right now, he is finishing his very last assignments for his very last college classes, and he'll be graduating in just a few weeks. My spouse David and I are planning to be up at graduation, which I must say we are glad will be outside, given the continuing COVID situation. I promise to take pictures and a little video footage maybe to share a little bit of our excitement with all of you. Our son Abe was born just 2 days after my own birthday. To celebrate this year, we drove up on Sunday afternoon to one of my favorite parks and took a walk around its paved paths. It was a gorgeous day, sunny and warm, almost hot, and the park was full of people. Many were in fancy dresses, perhaps some coming from religious services, and some taking prom pictures or wedding pictures. My favorite sight, though, was this mama and her adorable, fluffy babies. In the evening, my husband picked up pizza and champagne, our traditional celebratory meal. I remember back in my first year of graduate school, when I turned 23, just like my son is doing today. It's not nearly as exciting to celebrate birthdays when you are older than dirt, a phrase my husband reminded me of as we sat outside to drink our champagne. I hope that perhaps next week I can celebrate my birthday a bit on YouTube by doing the birth year tag that was going around a few months ago. One more bit of celebration. I am very pleased to have won second place in a writing competition. And I want to invite any of you who are interested to tune in to a virtual awards ceremony where I will be reading the short essay I submitted. I'd love to have you there on May 23rd at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll leave the full details down in the description box about how to register for the free event. The contest is the Kalanithi Writing Awards, created in memory of Paul Kalanithi, author of the amazing memoir, When Breath Becomes Air. Paul started the book at the very end of his training to be a neurosurgeon when he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. The book is his meditation about living with the knowledge that he was dying. It's also a love story between Paul and his wife Lucy, who wrote a stunningly beautiful afterword for the book where she writes about his death as well as his legacy. Lucy Kalanithi was one of the judges for this contest. I can't imagine an award that would mean more to me than this one. My essay is a brief selection from the joint memoir my husband and I are writing. We've been spending a lot of time lately trying to get words on the page. In fact, for my birthday, David agreed to participate with me in an at-home writing retreat where we spent a few days concentrating almost exclusively on our project. We tried to put off all our other responsibilities during the weekend, and we got a lot done. There is still, of course, an enormous amount to do. Let me tell you just a little bit about where we think the book is going. Like Paul Kalanithi, my husband is a physician with a terminal illness. Paul is a neurosurgeon, while David is a family doctor working for the federal government doing healthcare policy research. He has glioblastoma, brain cancer, with a prognosis of little more than a year. And he's now lived for more than 3.5 years and is doing very well. This extra time has been incredible, and to be honest, quite unexpected. Ever since we met, David and I have had a lot to talk about together. Some of the most powerful moments in our relationship have centered around projects we've created together. Before we were married, we put together an extensive, politically engaged Haggadah for our Passover Seder. And with a bit of editing, the Haggadah has been the main one we have used ever since. At a time when gay marriage was still illegal, we put together a wedding ceremony that combined various traditional Jewish practices with a completely gender-neutral text. The grappling we do when we are writing projects like these can sometimes get a little bit too intense, but it's brought us a kind of appreciation for the other person's mind and a shared sense of purpose that has been incredibly meaningful to me over the years, and especially now. I'm honored to be writing this with him. From very early on, our relationship has been strangely connected to the practice of medicine. In fact, our very first date, at least looking back, was to visit David's cadaver in the anatomy lab during David's first year of medical school. Our book will weave together stories about illness and living with mortality, but also consider the politics of healthcare and discussions about end-of-life decisions, etc. I may share a little bit more about our ideas later or about our writing process as the months go on. Some of you know that I'm an independent historian who in my earlier life published a couple of academic books with university presses. The second one is called Unspeakable and is the story of Junius Wilson, a deaf black man in early 20th century North Carolina who was wrongfully incarcerated for almost his entire life in a mental hospital. The story is a very complex one, and my co-author and I wanted to situate it in the context of North Carolina's history of Jim Crow racism, eugenics, etc. Last year, I was tremendously honored when Sean the Book Maniac led some other amazing booktubers, Brian at Bookish, Alba at Seriella, Justin at Ghost Reader, and Roz at Stanley About the Books, on a buddy read. They interviewed me after they had finished. In many ways, writing a memoir is totally different from writing an academic historical work, but at least one part really has been standing out to me this week. When my co-writer Susan and I were trying to construct the narrative, we committed ourselves to at least trying to avoid portraying anyone as a villain, even when people had supported a system of incredible racism or made other choices that most of us would consider unconscionable today. Our goal was to be honest about what they had done, but not to judge them. Instead, we sought to understand what social forces might have contributed to their choices. Writing a memoir, I think, or at least writing a memoir that has as much healthcare policy thinking in it as ours seems to, requires some of that same effort to be thoughtful, to try to understand why we might have had different ideas from each other. I don't mean here the differences of opinion that David and I have, although those differences do, of course, exist. I mostly mean when we hear other people come to very different decisions about, say, the place of religious belief and faith when one is dying, or the value of heroic medical intervention, or even the ethics of medical aid in dying. Sometimes when you're actually living through something, other people's assumptions can actually cause you to suffer. Writing this book is, I think, allowing me to be more reflective about the things people have sometimes said that we might have felt were cruel, specifically allowing me to reflect on how those people might have intended only to be kind. I'm not sure I'm really being clear about what I mean. Actually, perhaps the main point is simply that writing a memoir isn't only about getting down what we remember, but also about the process of trying to make sense of it. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity, and I can imagine that it might help me deal with some of the very hard times I know are ahead. Let me lighten the mood just a bit. The academic history books I published were not the first writing I ever did. When I was in the second or third grade, I wrote a series of stories, kind of modeled after the great little detective tales about the character Encyclopedia Brown. Did any of y'all read those books? My stories were about a set of mystery-solving triplets named April, May, and June. I actually had real aunts, or rather great-aunts, named May and June, but sadly they were not detectives. Anyway, I was telling David about those crazy stories as we drove back from the park after my birthday walk. It all seemed to come back to me in a flash, even down to the awkward little sketches of the sisters. One thing I remembered very clearly, April was, of course, born in April, just as I was. May was born in May, and June the following month. And they were triplets. Did I not know what being triplets meant? I was young, so who knows? I love my husband. He laughed at me, but then he immediately started figuring out how it might have actually been possible. It isn't all that uncommon for twins to be born on different days, when one is born before midnight and the other a few minutes later. That would also mean it would be possible for twins to be born in different months, or even different years or decades or centuries. I'm pretty sure I heard about one of those cases when one child was born in the final minutes of the 20th century and the twin sibling in the first minutes of the 21st. So absolutely, yes, I understand that. But triplets born in 3 months? Well, if they didn't all share one placenta, then one might be able to be born prematurely before labor was artificially stopped in order to extend the pregnancy longer. Thank you, David, for your extraordinary efforts to appreciate what is possible. Well, partly because of my interest and partly because of the book David and I are writing together, I've been reading a lot of memoirs about health, medicine, end-of-life experiences, including hospice and grief. Sometime soon, I might make a video about some of the books I've read recently, especially those that have been released very recently. But to wrap up today's video, I want to share a story from the book Dear Life, A Doctor's Story of Love, Loss, and Consolation by Rachel Clarke. Clarke is a specialist in palliative care, a field where the goal is not the extension of life, but instead the comfort of patients. She works in a hospice, and she writes about her experiences caring for people when they're dying. Perhaps the book sounds sad, and it certainly has moments that will make you cry, but it's filled with joy, too. Let me read you one of those joyful sections. Dorothy was admitted to the hospice on a Monday. "There's no point in spending time with me," she declared on arrival. "I'll be dead on Thursday." "What makes you think that?" I asked, intrigued. She gave me the kind of lingering stare a teacher reserves for the classroom dunce. Then, with surprising vigor, explained, "Mr. Edwards. I take it you know who Mr. Edwards is? The senior consultant on the surgical ward. Did he not communicate this with you? He told me my bowels had stopped working, and I would be dead in 6 days. And that was Friday. I have 3 days left." I knew the rudiments of Dorothy's story. Admitted to A&E with acute bowel obstruction, the cause of which was unclear. But given her age, 96, it was almost certainly a terminal diagnosis. A transfer to the hospice was arranged, but at no stage in the notes was there mention of Thursday. "I will concede I do not feel full of death," Dorothy stated. "I feel full of life, quite frankly. But if you don't mind, I would rather be left alone now. I have very little time left, and I would like to read my newspaper." Rarely in my career had I been dismissed more magnificently. I hardly dared to respond. "I promise to leave in just a moment," I told Dorothy, "but I do think it's important to mention that sometimes, even when what will happen next seems crystal clear, a person's circumstances change. Based on my medical assessment today, I'm not at all certain you will be dead on Thursday. If you had more time, is there any way in particular you would like to spend it? Again, that piercing stare, more impatient this time. Were I not to be dead on Thursday, then I would certainly be playing bridge with my local group, as I have done every Thursday for the last 2 decades. But I can assure you I will be dying instead. How about this, I proposed, as a compromise. We plan for bridge, unless death intervenes. Would you like me to see if I can organize to get you there? Young lady, I will humor you if it makes you feel useful. And with that, she picked up her copy of the Times. Thank you, I smiled to the sports page. I'll see what I can do. The Latin verb palliare, meaning to cloak, implies that the primary aim of palliative medicine is to disguise and suppress the symptoms of dying, as though the best you can hope for as death draws near is to benumb your pain with a morphine haze. But we can do better than that. If a single principle underpins palliative care, it is that living and dying are not binary opposites. The dying, as Dorothy proved so splendidly, are still very much alive. A good day for me in the hospice is undeniably one in which I feel we have helped someone die with comfort and dignity intact, but infinitely preferable are the days when we have helped a dying patient live, be that through sharing a meal with friends in the family area, watching a movie in bed with kids, basking in a bath filled with insanely priced bubble bath, stroking the family Labrador as he tries to eat the chocolates, saying a rushed but no less momentous I do from a wheelchair decked in flowers in the hospice chapel, or watching goldfinches gleam in the trees outside. No need for flashiness or fanfares, drum rolls, and gasps. In a ward where every patient has a terminal diagnosis, life, in all its loveliness, goes on. I have a partner in crime in the hospice. Jenny takes the fundamental aim of occupational therapy, helping patients achieve their maximum independence in the activities that matter to them, and turns it into a ninja art form. Over and over, I've watched her bring patients from a place of suffering to an experience they never believed was possible. Tiny, ebullient, and obsessed with otters, she does not so much save life as conjure it. And I knew she was going to love Dorothy. What do you reckon, then? I asked Jenny on Tuesday. Death or bridge on Thursday? She burst out laughing, before describing in detail how Dorothy had summarily dismissed her. Jenny and I liked to codename our plots. Because we knew nothing about bridge and had only the vaguest notion that playing cards were involved, we misnamed this one Operation Royal Flush. I learned only later that this is a winning hand in poker, and besides, the regal connotations befitted the subject. By Wednesday, with characteristic focus and zeal, Jenny had a wheelchair taxi booked to take Dorothy to the village bridge club, various blue-rinsed bridge partners on standby to call us in case of emergency, and a niece coming in that afternoon to deliver Dorothy's all-important pearls and twin set, the olive green she had instructed us. On Thursday morning, the nurses barred anyone from entering Dorothy's room as they busied themselves with washing, sprucing, plumping, and preening. When she finally emerged, she was 96 years old and still a force to be reckoned with. Desperately thin, her chariot a wheelchair, a preemptive dose of morphine in her veins, yet nonetheless sitting ramrod straight with crocodile handbag perched on her lap and an impeccably coordinated green tweed skirt, cashmere cardigan, and court shoes. Flushed with all the fuss and attention, Dorothy was, for that Thursday only, the queen of our ward, and she knew it. For a moment, our eyes met, and she nodded imperceptibly. Not quite a thank you, and certainly not an acknowledgment that I had been right. I suspected such a thing happened perhaps once a decade, but more I felt a shared understanding that here indeed was something to relish, a guerrilla raid to snatch back a speck of stolen future, a chance to live while dying. The next morning, when I arrived at her bedside to hear all about her trip to the bridge club, Dorothy bemoaned her poor form. I simply wasn't as sharp as usual, she lamented. I raised an eyebrow. To be fair, Dorothy, no one else around the table had the excuse that they were dying, I observed. Did anyone else seem to mind? A mischievous grin, a twinkle in her eye, and then finally I was liberated from the dunce's corner with the words, Dr. Clarke, it was magnificent. A few days later, Dorothy died. Mr. Edwards, it turned out, was wrong by only 48 hours, but in that time, how his patient lived. It should not have taken working in hospice to teach me that for all the fragility of human existence, our lives impossibly brief against the weight of world and time, life is life is life. There's always a speck of beauty or significance to be found in the life you have left, even, perhaps especially, at its end. Thank you so much for joining me here today on Hannah's Books. See you soon.